This is Rob Kilmer. There are people who are accountable and people who are not. That's what we are going to be talking about this week on You Defend It. Welcome to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. As always, callers to the show will need to take a position, be able to defend it with an argument that is factual, not emotional. And if you can't make your point without insulting someone, you can't make your point on this show. Callers and guests will be treated with complete respect. For my part, I will ask questions that matter and give people the opportunity to answer. My website is www.youdefendit.com. That's youdefendit.com. You can give me your comments on the show anytime. By Friday of each week, I will have the topics up for the next show. You can also visit my blog through the site, read my posts, and leave your own. And the lineup for the Sunday talk shows will be posted there on Saturdays. Okay, this week we are going to be talking about accountability. We're going to be talking about who is out there trying to solve the problems this country has and who is not. And I'm going to read from two quick articles. One from Reuters from February 20th involving California, and the other from the New York Times that was printed yesterday, which would also be the 20th, regarding what I consider to be an enormous step that Barack Obama is taking with respect to telling this country where we are financially, being honest about it. Enormous step. Huge move on his part. Long overdue, and we'll get to that in a minute. First article, and these are excerpts from the Reuters article involving California's budget problems. California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger signed a package of bills on Friday to close a $42 billion state budget gap, clearing the way for his campaign to rally voters to endorse ballot measures needed to further bolster the state's finances. Schwarzenegger acknowledged the budget, passed after an impasse in the legislature of more than 100 days, is a lean plan that slashes spending. It also requires substantial tax increases to keep the state's books balanced through July 2010. It's a budget where everyone will have to make certain sacrifices, the Republican governor said. Schwarzenegger noted he would veto about $1 billion of items from the budget. Quote, "We need to do those things in order to be fiscally responsible because government has to live within its means. That's the important message of this budget," end quote. Included in the budget package are bills requiring a number of ballot measures, including ones Democrats who control the legislature agreed to put to voters to secure the single Republican vote needed to put the package to Schwarzenegger. Budget-related ballot measures will ask voters to support a state spending cap, a state rainy day fund, shifting money from certain programs, and allowing the state to sell bonds backed by state lottery revenues. Another measure would freeze lawmakers' pay when the state budget is in deficit, and a measure for the June 2010 ballot would create an open primary election system, which may help moderates win elections and recast the state's politics, now riven by highly liberal and conservative office holders. That's the end of that article. We talked about Governor Patterson on this show, and New York Governor Patterson, and now California Governor Schwarzenegger. They're doing the hard things. They're doing the things that have to be done with no vocal support from anyone. Why is it that these people have to be out in front of these issues when other people, also elected to represent people in their respective states, are doing nothing? Everybody knows what the problems are. There are precious few people actually addressing them. And we'll get to why that is in a minute. But I want to get this other article read before the first break so we can talk about these articles and what I think is the underlying problem for the rest of the show. This article this ran in the New York Times, and anybody who was listening over the last few weeks knows that I was harshly critical of the stimulus package and Barack Obama a few weeks ago. There are things that are in it that I think have no place in it, but there are also things in it that should be in it. Today, however, I want to give credit where credit is due. And again, I think what he is doing, and I'm going to read you this article about it now, is a major, major step on his part. Obama bans gimmicks and deficit will rise. This is from the New York Times, February 19th. For his first annual budget next week, President Obama has banned 4 accounting gimmicks that President George Bush used to make deficit projections look smaller. The price of more honest bookkeeping, a budget that is $2.7 trillion deeper in the red over the next decade than it would otherwise appear, according to administration officials. The new accounting method involves spending on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Medicare reimbursements to physicians, and the cost of disaster responses. But the biggest adjustment will deal with revenues from the alternative minimum tax, a parallel tax system enacted in 1969 to prevent the wealthy from using tax shelters to avoid paying any income tax. Even with bigger deficit projections, the Obama administration will put the country on a sustainable fiscal course by the end of Mr. Obama's term. Peter Orszag, the Director of Office of Management and Budget, said Thursday in an interview. Mr. Orszag did not provide details of how much the administration would reduce a deficit expected to reach at least $1.5 trillion this year. Mr. Obama's banishment of the gimmicks, which have been widely criticized, is in keeping with his promise to run a more transparent government. The $2.7 trillion in additional deficit spending, Mr. Orszag said, is a huge amount of money that would be just kind of a magic asterisk otherwise. Recent presidents and Congresses were complicit in the ploy involving the alternative minimum tax. If people paid it, the government would get billions of dollars more in tax revenues, which is what past budgets have projected. But it would also probably mean a taxpayer revolt. So each year the White House and Congress agree to patch the alternative tax for inflation, and the extra revenues never materialize. Nearly $70 billion of the $787 billion stimulus package reflected the bookkeeping cost of adjusting the alternative tax for a year. The White House Budget Office calculates that over the next decade, the tax would add $1.2 trillion in revenues, but Mr. Obama is not counting those revenues and is adding $218 billion to the 10-year deficit projections to reflect the added interest the government would pay for its extra debt. As far as war costs are concerned, Mr. Bush included little or none in his annual military budgets, instead routinely asking Congress for supplemental appropriations during the year. Mr. Obama will include those cost projections over every year through the 2019 fiscal year to cover overseas military contingencies, nearly $500 billion over those 10 years. For Medicare, Mr. Bush routinely budgeted less than actual costs for payments to physicians, although he and Congress regularly waived a law mandating the lower reimbursements for fear that doctors would quit serving beneficiaries in protest. Mr. Obama will budget $401 billion over 10 years for these higher costs and interest on the debt. Finally, he will also budget $273 billion in that period for natural disasters. Every year the government pays billions for disaster relief, but presidents and lawmakers have long ignored budget reformers' calls for a contingency account to reflect that certainty. That's the end of that article. That was it's longer than the articles I ordinarily read or the excerpts from articles, but it's important. I think that by making the budgeting honest, we can at least start to comprehend the real problems this country faces from a financial standpoint. I think this is an incredible move on his part. Incredible. When we come back, we will talk about it more. But essentially, what he is doing is taking steps that will make the problems seem worse than they are. Because, well, maybe I they will reflect what they really are, I should say. It will be reality for a change, but not what America is used to when it comes to hearing these numbers. So things will seem like they have gotten worse, when in fact you've been misled for years by Republican presidents and Democratic Congresses about what the true state of our nation's finances are. We'll be back. You're listening to Rob Kilmer, and You Defend It. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. All right, we left off talking about Barack Obama having announced that he was doing away with the gimmicks that other presidents and Congresses have used to mislead us as to the actual deficits this country runs. And that's what it really boils down to. It's the deficits that are being hidden. There is no question that since 2001 we have been at war. Yet, and since 2003, we've been at war not just with in Afghanistan, but in Iraq. None of the money spent on any of those wars was part of any budget. They were emergencies, supplementals they're called. It is obscene that this was allowed to go on this way. When you hear every year, well, they ran a $400 billion deficit. They didn't. They ran an $800 billion deficit or a $600 billion deficit because they didn't include the money they spent on the war. You mean to tell me we didn't know from year to year we were in a war or two? I think getting back to fundamental honesty when it comes to our finances, when it comes to telling the American people the reality of the situation we're in, is the only way to begin the process of resolving the situation we're in. This is a big deal. It really is. This is an important step. And it's going to make him look worse in the short term. I mean, you will have people who are exploiting the numbers, who are not willing to be honest with you. You are going to have people say, you know, we talked about George Bush's debt, $400 billion. We got Obama at $2 trillion. Without explaining to you that George Bush's deficit wasn't $400 billion. He was only telling you part of the story. Again, this is an important first step. The way I see this, Obama's saying, look, we've got challenges to face, and they're massive. But before he even proposes his first budget, he's saying if we're going to confront these horrible issues, then we're all going to be on the same page here. No more of this distorting the reality of our finances. No more distorting where this country really is from a money standpoint. This is where we are. Now, let's get on with fixing it. Important move. But it also underscores a broader point I want to make on today's show. You know, it's crunch time for America right now. It's a defining time for America's future. This is it. Whether or not we sacrifice, whether or not we tackle these problems, whether or not we are willing to do the hard things, is going to determine where we are in the world. If you're broke, you can't do things. It's that simple. You end up in reliance. And that's what foreign policy is all about. Who needs to rely on who for what? That is, I mean, if you were to distill the concept of foreign policy, the underpinning of all of foreign policy, that would be it. What do you need? That's how you determine what your foreign policy is, whether it's needing to keep yourself safe from some countries or needing things from other countries. That's what your foreign policy is. It's based on your needs. And when you become a financial disaster, as we are becoming or have become, then your leverage, your ability to get what you want in this world is critically undermined. You are not in a position of strength. You are in a position of need. We shouldn't be in this spot. And getting out of it starts with acknowledging the spot we're in. And you do that by saying, this is the real state of the money in America. So I applaud him for doing it. I was all over him for the stimulus package, but at least $70 billion of it is going towards correcting a lie that's been out there forever about this alternative minimum tax. And I think that having an honest conversation with the American people about the finances of this country is long overdue. It's a good thing. And it shows the rest of the world that we're serious about this. The rest of the world relies on our leaders not leading. That helps them. You know, the Saudis and OPEC, they just kind of rub their hands together and grin when they see the American people being misled, knowing that we will fall further and further into debt. Into their debt. Into China's debt. Those countries love that, to a point. To a point where we're rapidly approaching the point where these countries, it won't be in their best interest to lend to us. I see I got a phone call here. I don't know if I will be able to get to it by 8:30, but I will try. The broader issue to me is who steps up. Why are the presidents, why are the mayors, why are the governors, why are they the ones who are stepping up here? I mean, you saw that it was Republican governors, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, who supported the stimulus package when others did not. There were no Republican votes for it in the House, 3 Republican votes for it in the Senate, which, as I said last week, is that's just despicable. I mean, under those circumstances, the only thing you can really rationally conclude is that Republicans are hoping for, banking on, from a political standpoint, the stimulus not working. That's what they need to get back in office. But if that happens, what will have happened to the American public by then? That is a grossly irresponsible position to take. In fact, when you really think about it, the stimulus vote, you realize that Republicans voted against tax cuts, in order to not be associated with this stimulus package. Although everybody agrees that we have to do something in this economy, they took that risk, and in so doing, voted against what they claimed to be one of their core principles, cutting taxes. You don't see that very often. And in these times, it's hard to believe that we've seen it again. When we get back after the break, after Paul Harvey at 8:30, I want to talk about leadership and who the people are that we need right now, and what types of people over time have really come in and taken this country where it needs to go. And we've had them. We've had those unique people who are willing to take on challenges, willing to be honest about it, willing to do the hard things. And this country cries out for leadership right now. And there is precious little of it. There's a lot of gaming of the system going on right now from people who are supposed to be, people who are elected and supposed to be looking out for us, are looking out for themselves. They're looking out for the next election and how best to position themselves for that election, to the horrible detriment of this country. In fact, although I don't like to talk about New York politics. I saw in today's paper that the Attorney General is going across the state right now, pitching consolidation. And consolidation it's a difficult issue. Nobody ever really wants. Everybody talks about wanting to consolidate, but nobody really wants to give up power. Nobody wants to give over their municipality responsibilities to somebody else. It's rare. But to me, we got a Attorney General right now who is running around the state telling people essentially what he would do as governor. We've got a governor. In fact, we've got a governor who's not being supported in any way in trying to set this state right. And it is amazing to me that Andrew Cuomo is essentially trying to convince the state that he would be a better governor. He should stop exploiting New York's problems by essentially auditioning for another job and get back to doing his own. We got a governor right now. We need an Attorney General who's actually going to be on the job. And I'm not saying he's doing a bad job as Attorney General. I'm saying he should stick with that. We got enough problems right now. Paul Harvey's up next from 8:30 to 8:35. We will be back right after him. This is You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. Phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. We left off talking about the fact that there are certain people who are going to step up and others who are not. And I have openly questioned why it is that there are not more people, well, there's not anyone that I know of in the New York legislature offering Governor Patterson a hand. Everybody's mad at Governor Patterson because he's making everybody hurt, which is the only way you can get out of a budget problem this big. $14 billion is a lot of money. And the way things have been operating in this state for decades is what brought us here. Nobody wants to change it. Everybody wants the benefits of the change, that being a sound state budget. Nobody wants the pain that comes with it. And the difference between leaders and followers is that leaders say there's going to be pain, and we're going to do it anyway because it's what's right. And in these times in America, and it's getting worse by the week, you will be hearing shortly about you've already heard about it, I'm sure, but you will be seeing it come to fruition, these zombie banks, which are banks that we've talked occasionally in here about how many banks have already failed. There are a number of banks that have essentially already failed, in addition to those that have officially failed and closed. But everybody knows these banks are existing on toxic debt. They cannot, they're essentially already dead and will close. And we'll be seeing much more of that in the weeks and months to come, because there's no question it's going to get worse before it gets better in this country. But people are fundamentally inclined, I believe, to accept as little responsibility as possible. They run from it. But you don't get to indulge that inclination when you run for and are elected to a representative position. We need to remind our elected representatives of that. When you're in the executive branch, you have to step up because it's just you, and that's why they do. You have a greater responsibility. You have a greater visibility. Legislators don't. They don't have that visibility. What is shameful is that they rely on that lack of visibility and accountability to avoid doing their job. By definition, they are part of a collective. They need to come up with a collective response or approach or plan or something to help. Instead, too often, they just simply sit in judgment of the executive branch. We all wait on the edge of our seats to see what they're going to say and do about what the executive branch proposes. Now, whether it's Governor Schwarzenegger or Governor Patterson or President Obama, they're out there saying, this is what has to happen to right the ship. And there's no question that from a mathematical standpoint, certain things have to happen. Revenue has to increase, spending has to decrease. It's that simple. It's the only way you close a gap. But none of these people are individually accountable. They're all part of something bigger. They get to deflect and defer. Where are the people who are willing? That's what I want to know. Where are the people who are willing to step up despite this? The truly great people out there, the truly great elected officials, are the ones who turn their back on the advantages offered by relative anonymity. Those are the good ones. I don't know where they are now. They're non-existent as far as I know. I don't know where the New York legislator is who is saying, I'm behind Patterson 100%, you should be too. Not one. Schwarzenegger had to keep the California legislature in session for 100 hours straight. Why did he have to keep them in session? Didn't they know there was a problem? Was it news to them? Did they feel no pressure to resolve the state's finances unless he told them to? The amount of irresponsibility that is contributing to these problems not being resolved is staggering. We have Jim on the phone from Endicott. Jim, are you there?
I agree with much of what you say, and, well, pretty much all of what you say. I appreciate your show. I think one of those leaders perhaps might be you. Have you ever thought of running for office?
Yes and no. I won't run for office, but I ran for the town board in Vestal I think it was 10 years ago now. And I ran for town judge before that, but I had a problem because I worked for the county of Tioga at the time, and some of my money was federal, and I was barred from going forward because of the Hatch Act. I could have been a contender.
Well, I appreciate your common sense approach. You know, it makes everything kind of understandable in a complicated world. What I wanted to ask you about is the gas drilling situation. I'm frustrated that a lot of the companies coming into the United States are foreign companies, and you know, here we're trying to get away from the Middle Eastern oil, and you know, if it's gas leasing rights we're giving away to
right.
Canada, and there's the gold and other minerals too. And is there any chance we could put a stop to that? And like you say, I'm afraid of what China's doing. They practically own us.
Right. Well, I got another couple calls lined up.
Okay.
Thanks very much for calling.
Bye-bye.
He's right. That is the big myth, and we've talked about it on here before. Drill now. Like that's going to help gas prices in America. There is zero legislative requirement right now that any of the gas or the oil drilled in America would stay in America. None. It would go right back onto the open market, where it would be subject to the same brutal fluctuations that OPEC can inflict upon the world market now. I mean, understand this. When we are talking about drilling for oil in America, we should be drilling here, drilling there. We have our own resources here. It all depends on who owns the leasing rights. And we have no control over that. We haven't nationalized that. There is not one guarantee. There's anybody who told you that there was a way to ensure that one drop of oil taken out of America, taken either out of the continental America or off our shores, would necessarily be sold in America, would be lying through their teeth. That is the big fraud in this argument about drilling in America. That oil belongs to whoever has purchased the lease. OPEC, Saudi Arabia. It is an utter lie to tell the public that we need to drill for oil in America to drive down prices here. One has nothing to do with the other. And the people who are pitching this know this. That's what makes it even more reprehensible. And why am I making this point? Where are the people who are against drilling? Where's Chuck Schumer? Where are all these people? Why are they not making this point? Again, all you have to do, in my opinion, is explain things to the American public. They assume that you've explained things to them. You know, the inherent willingness of Americans to trust their leaders. But in this day and age, with the number of cable channels, the number of radio shows out there, the fact that I would venture to say 99% of this country is completely unaware that there is no relationship between the area from which the oil is drilled and the area in which it is sold. Nobody realizes that. It is accepted as a credible argument, this drill, baby, drill, that if we just drilled more in America, our prices would go down. That argument is ludicrous and demonstrably false. But you don't hear it. We're going to go to one more break here. I got another caller who I will get to right after the break. And then I want to finish up talking about the type of people that I'm looking for, that Americans are looking for. And right now, they're not out there. They're not out there running, and if they're elected, they're not out there acting. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF, Binghamton. Okay, I want to get right to one more phone call here. Frank, you there?
Hi, Rob.
How are you?
Hi.
Welcome to You Defend It.
Thanks. If I were a politician, I would have voted no on the stimulus bill, and I think you would have too. And I'll tell you why. One simple reason. No one was given a chance to read the bill. Pelosi said to the Republicans, hey, you guys don't need to see the bill because you voted no on iterations 1 and 2. She told the Democrats, trust me, vote for this bill. I know you won't have a chance to read this. I don't think you would have voted for it.
If I knew generally what was in it, and I think the important, I won't say the important, or I shouldn't say it. What's surprising to me is that and that was John Boehner's big argument, I think, when he held it up and dropped it on the floor. It said it's 1,100 pages, nobody's read it. What I expected, though, was since that time, for there to be revelations about what's in it that nobody knew about. I think that and there haven't been any. And I think that the general framework of the bill was known. I think that to the extent that people were supposed to be given an opportunity to read it and weren't, I think that's another case of the Democrats blowing it.
Yeah.
But I didn't hear, I heard John Boehner saying that, but I didn't hear, that was not the collective reason why 0 Republicans voted for it. They were against it because they felt that overall the number itself was too high and it spent too much money.
Well, you know, if here's another thing. The case in point, we have 2 states in horrible financial condition, New York and California. I think it's 25 billion and 50 billion. Now, why doesn't Obama tell them to do the same thing that he is doing? He say, hey, guys, spend your way out of this problem. He isn't doing that. California is, I know you mentioned Schwarzenegger. They have a lot of oil to sell, even at these low prices. If they drilled more, they could tap this resource, but they don't do it.
But they don't own that land.
And the situation is even stranger from what I understand. This last week I heard if they uncapped the wells they have already drilled, they could really make a huge dent in this deficit, and they don't want to do that. I don't know why. I agree with your Patterson position. He is at least trying to cut some spending.
And Cuomo's out there undercutting him, and polls show Cuomo would destroy him right now in a race for governor.
2-1.
And Cuomo hasn't offered a single reason to vote for him other than consolidation. He's not asking anybody to do anything that's hard, and that is sad commentary on what the public is willing to accept.
Let me just throw in one quick thing, what I read this week about Sarah Palin. She has an Alaskan surplus cash box. In that box, there's about $6.5 billion. Now, the Alaskans depend heavily on the price of oil, and that's down right now. But is Palin going to dig into her cash box? No, she's not. She is actually cutting spending, and I haven't seen that anywhere except in I've heard that on one show. Interesting, though.
It is. Thanks very much for calling.
Bye-bye.
Take care. I got one other caller who I will try and get to, but I want to make one other point here. And what I believe this country needs is somebody or several people, people who are willing to walk away from the protections afforded to them by being one of a huge group and just go out there and start advocating on their own for things that they know are right, but they don't want to take responsibility for. There are people who are willing to do that and people who are not. A friend of mine is fond of saying, with respect to people who run for office or want to run for office, there are people who want to be something and people who want to do something. You got to want to do something. You got to be the type of person who is willing to be identified, and your success or failure will be identified with you personally. That's the type of person, and believes enough in themselves and in what they're pursuing and in the rightness of their ideas to go out there and do it. There just aren't that many people out there. I digress for a minute, but it is the nearest example of what I'm talking about on a non-political level. I have an older brother who was a wrestler in high school. His freshman year, he was 0-15. And he didn't like that. So in between his freshman and sophomore year, he worked out. He worked with a wrestling coach from another school. And in his sophomore year, he was 23-2. Stack champion number of times. And I remember talking to him one day about, what is it with wrestling? What is the attraction there to wrestling? And he said, it's just me. There's nobody else on the mat. It's just me. If I win, I win. If I lose, I lose. There's nobody to blame it on. It wasn't bad play calling. It wasn't, it wasn't some other member of the team who let the rest of us down. It was me. And those are the type of people who go on to achieve things. And that's what we need now. People who are willing to go out there and say, I'm willing to be related to, I'm willing to be associated with this problem in hopes that I can bring a solution to it. And there's nobody out there right now. They're all taking advantage of the fact that you've got a president who's proposing hard things. You've got governors proposing hard things. They're just criticizing the fact that pain is associated with this rather than stepping up recognizing how we got into this mess and proposing ways to get out of it. It is amazing to me the way elected representation has become a spectator sport. I don't get it. I don't accept it. None of us should. Judy, are you there?
Yes.
Welcome
Yes.
to You Defend It.
Yes. I was going to try to just go over a point or two on this financial correction. Now, this is a correction that's of the financial community.
Can I just interrupt you? Can you do me a favor and turn the radio off?
I don't have the radio on. I have
Okay.
the TV on.
Oh, okay.
And the thing of it is that this correction is with the financial community. A lot of the banks in the country are sound and solid, and some of them tend to invest right in their own communities. Now, when you have these guys boxing and moving your debt, if you get a small loan and you box it up to the next level,
Right.
and we tend
Selling
to
loans.
when we tend to in a recessionary period, we do what our grandfathers and grandmothers told us to do. We pay our debt. That's not spurring the economy. That's one of the problems that's tied to this economy, is that people are now, let's clean up our own mess here. Let's get ourselves under control here, and it's not in a spend mode, which that was our financial treadmill or rotation, if you will. And right now, my pay price is connected to the Chicago Mercantile. You can check with any farmer between here and Timbuktu, and they'll tell you that their prices have hit and slashed to the barest, down to the bottom and below. The USDA knows it costs us about $29 a hundredweight to make milk in this state, and it reaches as high as $43 a hundredweight. And I got my paycheck the other day that had been at $1,400 for me to spend, and we were squeezing and stressing, and it came in the other day at $700. It won't even cover the grain prices. Now, if you're going to correct, and I have been out in the public and tried to say to them that this isn't right, when they wanted to get into the WTO and they wanted to be able to buy wherever they can get components or whatever for the cheese vats, and they make so much of it that they have to trade it in carloads on the Chicago Mercantile. And then when they dump contracts back on that Chicago Mercantile,
When who does
drives,
this? When who does this?
When whoever holds the contracts that are purchasing, it could be DFA, it could be somebody else that has a contract come due, but when they trade them back, it has the net effect of driving prices to the bottom. And then when the market takes a correction, it pounds it down even further. And I am tied by Congress. I can't get anybody to change this pricing structure. We stood up in our state and screamed bloody murder. It doesn't matter. They don't want us to make any money. When that thing slides down, when you deal on the
Are we talking about
Chicago Mercantile or any of those,
dairy compacts?
It's a gambling
here?
kind of thing.
Are you talking about a dairy compact here in any respect, by the way?
Not trying to push a compact or anything. I'm just saying what is going on isn't right, and it's corrupt, and it's not fair to these farmers. I don't care what size they are. It doesn't matter. Excuse me. But it is still incorrect. If the product is growing and the public is growing, I shouldn't be on an up and down roller coaster ride for pricing at somebody else's whim or the market whims. Okay?
Well, and when you say market, I got 30 seconds left in the show. You're talking about, I think, and we haven't had time to develop this at all, but you're talking about speculators and things of that nature who buy and sell these contracts.
Somewhat speculators, but it usually is in a tight group of people that control this.
Okay.
And, it's
I got to
hard.
stop you there.
You can't win.
15 seconds left in the show.
You can't win.
Thanks very much for calling.
Thanks.
Yep. That's going to do it for this week. I'm sure next week we'll talk about this some more. You have been listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF.